Zixthara stared at the glowing screen in front of him. The data streams showed a small, blue, and green world, spinning slowly in the darkness of space. His 6 arms moved quickly across the control panel, gathering information about the planet the humans called Kepler 442c. The Valderan hegemony had given it a different name. Harvest 7. The planet looked peaceful from space. White clouds drifted over green continents and blue oceans. Cities dotted the surface like tiny lights. Zixthara's instruments told him that 50,000 humans lived on this world. They had been here for only 30 years, building farms and homes far from their home planet. Another easy conquest, thought Zixthara as he made notes in his report. As a military analyst for the hegemony, he had studied hundreds of species before their worlds were added to the empire. Most followed the same pattern. They would see the massive hegemony fleet approaching, calculate their chances of survival, and surrender without a fight. The humans seemed no different from the others. Their technology was primitive by hegemony standards. They still used kinetic weapons that fired metal bullets. Their ships burned chemical fuel to travel between planets. They had no plasma weapons, no gravity shields, no quantum computers. According to his scans, they were at least 300 years behind Valderan science. Zixthara pulled up the tactical analysis on his secondary screen. The hegemony had sent 200,000 soldiers to claim this world. The humans had perhaps 5,000, with any military training. The rest were farmers, doctors, teachers, and engineers. It should be over in a few hours. The hegemony fleet commander, General Vorth, opened a communication channel to the human colony. Zixthara listened as the general's voice echoed through space, translated into the human language by their computers. "Attention human settlement," General Vorth announced. "You are now in Valderan space. Surrender immediately, and you will be relocated to suitable worlds within our empire. Resist and face complete destruction. You have 1 standard hour to respond." Zixthara watched the human cities through his long-range cameras. He expected to see panic. Instead, something strange happened. The humans moved with calm purpose. Children were loaded onto transport vehicles and driven away from the cities. Adults gathered in the streets, but they were not screaming or running. They were organizing. Old humans with gray hair picked up weapons alongside young adults barely out of school. Doctors and teachers stood next to mechanics and farmers. They all had the same look in their eyes. Zixthara had seen that look before in cornered predators on his homeworld. It was the look of something that had decided to fight. The hour passed. Zixthara waited for the surrender message that always came. Instead, his communication array crackled to life with a human transmission. The voice was calm, speaking in clear tones without fear or anger. "This is Colonel Sarah Chen, speaking for the people of New Geneva Colony. We have received your ultimatum. Our response is simple." The transmission ended. Zixthara stared at his screen in confusion. He ran the message through his translator 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. The humans were refusing to surrender. 50,000 civilians with primitive weapons were refusing to surrender to 200,000 hegemony soldiers. General Vorth's angry voice filled the command channel. "Foolish creatures. Begin the assault. Make it quick." But Zixthara found himself troubled by what he had seen. In all his years of studying pre-conquest species, he had never seen anything like the human response. Most species either surrendered immediately or fought in wild, desperate attacks that ended quickly. The humans seemed different. They were not panicking, but they were not giving up either. He zoomed his cameras in on the human capital city of Haven. Barricades were being built from furniture and vehicles. Humans with rifles took positions on rooftops and behind walls. What struck Zixthara was how organized they were. Someone had clearly planned for this moment. A young human female, perhaps 20 years old, was helping to set up what looked like a medical station in a protected building. When she finished, she picked up a rifle and took position at a window. An elderly human male was teaching a group of teenagers how to operate some kind of explosive device. A human who looked like a teacher was coordinating the placement of sharpshooters throughout the city. These were not soldiers. These were ordinary people. But they moved and acted like they had been preparing for war their entire lives. The first hegemony dropships broke through the atmosphere, their plasma engines lighting up the sky. Zixthara watched the human defenders track the ships with their primitive optical scopes. They did not fire immediately. They waited. When the dropships landed and began unloading troops, the humans opened fire. Their weapons were crude compared to hegemony plasma rifles, but they were accurate. Hegemony soldiers began falling before they could properly deploy. What happened next surprised Zixthara even more. When the hegemony forces returned fire with their superior weapons, the humans did not break and run. They fell back to secondary positions, continued firing, and called out information to each other about hegemony tactics and weak points. They were learning. In the middle of battle, while being shot at by superior forces, the humans were studying their enemy and adapting their tactics. As the first day of fighting ended, Zixthara looked at his casualty reports. The hegemony had taken significant losses, capturing just the outer districts of one human city. This was supposed to be easy. He began to write his preliminary report, but found himself struggling to find the right words. How do you explain that a primitive species was fighting like they had nothing to lose? How do you tell your superiors that their easy conquest was becoming something else entirely? Zixthara looked back at his screens, where human defenders were regrouping for another day of fighting. Something cold moved through his stomach as he realized this was only the beginning. 3 days had passed since the fighting began, and Zixthara could not believe what he was seeing. Haven City should have fallen in the first 6 hours. Instead, the human defenders were still holding most of their positions, and the hegemony casualties were climbing toward numbers that made no sense. Zixthara watched through his observation drones as hegemony troops advanced down a main street toward the city center. The humans had abandoned the street completely, leaving it empty and quiet. General Vorth's soldiers moved forward confidently, their plasma rifles ready, their energy shields glowing blue. Then the street exploded. The humans had buried explosives under the road surface. Not the advanced quantum charges that most species used, but simple chemical explosives made from farming supplies. When the smoke cleared, 30 hegemony soldiers were dead or wounded. But that was not the part that bothered Zixthara. What bothered him was what happened next. As hegemony medics rushed to help the wounded soldiers, human snipers opened fire from hidden positions. They were not trying to kill the medics. Instead, they aimed carefully at the hegemony weapons and equipment, disabling what they could while the soldiers were distracted. Then, something happened that Zixthara had never seen before. A human medic ran out from behind cover, directly into the crossfire. She reached the wounded hegemony soldiers and began treating their injuries. Both sides stopped shooting. The woman worked quickly and efficiently, stabilizing the worst wounds and calling for evacuation. She saved 4 hegemony lives before running back to her own lines. 10 minutes later, she was back at her sniper position, shooting at the next hegemony advance. Impossible, Zixthara whispered to himself. The human had risked her life to save enemy soldiers, then immediately returned to trying to kill different enemy soldiers. It made no tactical sense, but the humans were full of actions that made no tactical sense. In the residential district, an elderly human couple had rigged their house with explosives rather than let hegemony forces use it as a command post. They had died in the explosion, taking 12 hegemony soldiers with them. Near the industrial sector, a group of human teenagers had held a strategic bridge for 18 hours against constant attacks. When hegemony forces finally overran their position, they found that all 6 defenders were dead, but their weapons were still firing. The humans had rigged automatic firing systems to keep working even after they died. Zixthara studied the casualty reports with growing unease. Hegemony doctrine said that any military unit should withdraw when losses reached 15%. At 20%, complete retreat was mandatory. The humans were still fighting with 70% casualties. He pulled up psychological profiles of the human defenders. They were not fanatics or religious zealots. They were ordinary people. A shopkeeper who had become a sniper. A mechanic who built explosive traps. A nurse who commanded a squad of fighters. None of them had extensive military training, but all of them fought like professional soldiers. General Vorth's voice crackled over the command frequency. Analyst Zix Thara. Explain these casualty numbers. Your report said this would be a simple conquest. Zix Thara hesitated before responding. How could he explain that the humans seemed to have no concept of acceptable losses? How could he tell the general that every human who died seemed to make the remaining defenders fight harder instead of giving up? General, the humans are not responding to combat losses in predictable ways. They appear to view casualties as acceptable at rates that exceed all known military doctrine. Nonsense, the general replied. No species fights when the odds are impossible. They will break soon. But Zix Thara was beginning to doubt that. He watched as human defenders systematically destroyed everything of value in the city, rather than let it be captured intact. They collapsed bridges, burned supply depots, and demolished communication towers. They were following a strategy that Zix Thara recognized from his studies of extinct predator species. If you cannot win, make winning worthless for your enemy. On the fourth day, something changed in the human tactics. Instead of holding fixed positions, they began moving in small groups, striking quickly and disappearing. They used the city's sewer systems and maintenance tunnels to appear behind hegemony lines, attack supply convoys, and fade away before reinforcements could arrive. The most disturbing part was how they coordinated these attacks. The humans had no quantum communication devices, no telepathic abilities, no advanced command systems, yet they moved like a single organism, each group supporting the others in perfect timing. Zix Thara realized they were using simple radio communications and messenger runners to coordinate their efforts. They had turned primitive technology into an advantage, using communication methods that hegemony electronic warfare systems were not designed to jam. By the sixth day, hegemony forces had taken control of most of Haven City, but at a cost that made General Vorth furious. 15,000 casualties to capture one small human settlement. The remaining 8,000 humans had retreated to the mountains surrounding the city, carrying their wounded and as many supplies as they could manage. Zix Thara watched the human evacuation through his long-range cameras. They moved in organized columns, with scouts ahead and guards protecting the rear. Even in retreat, they maintained discipline and order. Many of the humans were clearly wounded, but they continued moving without complaint. What struck Zix Thara most was the expression on their faces. They were not defeated. They looked like soldiers, falling back to prepared positions, ready to continue the fight from better ground. As he updated his report that night, Zix Thara found himself writing something he had never written before. Recommend caution in pursuing enemy forces. Human tactical adaptability exceeds all previous models. He stared at the words for a long time before sending the report. Somewhere in the mountains, 8,000 humans were preparing for the next phase of their resistance. The thought of hunting them down filled Zix Thara with an emotion he did not recognize at first. It was fear. 2 weeks had passed since the humans retreated to the mountains, and Zix Thara was beginning to understand that the hegemony had made a terrible mistake. What should have been a simple cleanup operation had become a nightmare that grew worse each day. The mountain ranges of Kepler 442c stretched for hundreds of kilometers, full of caves, deep valleys, and rocky peaks that rose above the clouds. General Vorth had sent 185,000 troops to hunt down 8,000 human survivors. It should have been like using a hammer to crush an insect. Instead, the humans had turned the entire mountain range into a weapon. Zix Thara watched through his surveillance drones as a hegemony patrol moved carefully along a mountain trail. The soldiers were alert and ready, their energy shields active and their weapons charged. They had learned to be cautious after losing so many troops in the past 2 weeks. The trail looked safe. Zix-Thara's sensors showed no human heat signatures, no movement, no signs of traps or ambushes. The patrol continued forward, following standard hegemony procedures for hostile territory. Then the mountain itself seemed to come alive. Humans emerged from positions that should not have been possible to hide in. They rose from beneath piles of rocks that looked completely natural. They appeared from cave openings that the drones had scanned and found empty. They came out of the ground itself, through tunnels that connected to positions kilometers away. The battle lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, the entire hegemony patrol was dead or wounded, and the humans had disappeared back into the mountain as if they had never been there. But this attack was different from the earlier ones. Zix-Thara noticed that the humans had taken time to study the hegemony equipment before destroying it. They had carefully removed power cells, communication devices, and weapon components. They were learning how hegemony technology worked. "Impossible," General Vorth said when Zix-Thara reported the attack. "Primitive beings cannot understand our technology." But Zix-Thara was beginning to realize that calling the humans primitive was a dangerous mistake. Yes, their technology was less advanced, but their minds were something else entirely. They learned faster than any species he had ever studied. Every encounter with hegemony forces taught them something new, and they used that knowledge to become more effective. The proof came 3 days later when another hegemony patrol was attacked. This time, the humans used modified hegemony energy cells to power improvised explosive devices. They had figured out how to reverse engineer alien technology in less than a week. But the real horror was still hidden beneath the mountains. It began with strange reports from hegemony ground troops. Soldiers would disappear during the night, taken from their sleeping positions without anyone hearing a sound. Equipment would vanish from supposedly secure areas. Supply convoys would find their routes blocked by landslides that seemed too perfectly placed to be natural. Zix-Thara decided to investigate personally. He took a stealth probe deep into the mountain range, using every scanning technology available to map what the humans were doing. What he found made his blood turn cold. The humans had not just hidden in the mountains. They had rebuilt their entire civilization underground. Using mining equipment from their colony, hand tools, and captured hegemony technology, they had carved out an enormous tunnel system that connected hundreds of natural caves. But it was not just a hiding place. It was a fortress, a factory, and a city, all at once. Zix-Thara's probe showed him manufacturing areas where humans were building weapons from salvaged materials, medical facilities where wounded fighters were treated and returned to combat, training areas where civilians were being taught military tactics, storage rooms filled with supplies that should not have existed. The humans had been preparing for this moment since the day the hegemony fleet arrived. While fighting in the city, they had been moving equipment and supplies to these mountain bases. Every day of resistance had been part of a larger plan. Most disturbing of all, they were growing their forces instead of shrinking them. The 8,000 humans who retreated to the mountains had somehow become 12,000. They were recruiting from hidden civilian populations, training new fighters, and expanding their capabilities even while under constant attack. Zix-Thara watched a particular scene that would haunt his dreams for years afterward. A human female, perhaps 16 years old, was lying on a rocky ledge with a rifle that looked like it had been built from spare parts. She was alone, watching a hegemony supply convoy moving through a valley below. For 6 days, this single human held up the movement of an entire battalion. Every time hegemony forces tried to advance, her accurate shooting would force them to take cover. Every time they tried to locate her position, she would move to a new hiding spot. Her shots were so precise that she could disable vehicles without killing the drivers, creating traffic jams that lasted for hours. When hegemony forces finally found her position, she was already dead, not killed by enemy fire, but from exhaustion and dehydration. She had fought alone for 6 days without food or water, refusing to abandon her post even when it meant her death. Next to her body, they found a journal. The final entry read, "Convoy held up for 144 hours. Battalion strength reduced by harassment fire. Intelligence gathered on vehicle armor and movement patterns. Data cache hidden at reference point 7 for recovery by friendlies." Even in death, she had been collecting information for other human fighters. That night, Zixthara sent a desperate message to Hegemony High Command. Request immediate reinforcements. Human resistance capabilities severely underestimated. Current forces insufficient for mission completion. The response came back within hours. Reinforcement request denied. Use biological weapons if necessary. End resistance immediately. Zixthara stared at the message in horror. Biological weapons were banned by hegemony law, except in cases of extreme emergency. Their use would kill every living thing on the planet, including plants and animals that could be valuable to the Empire. But General Vorth was already preparing the weapon systems. As Zixthara watched the preparations begin, he found himself thinking about the human female on the mountain ledge. She had died alone, fighting impossible odds for people she would never see again. Her sacrifice had delayed enemy movements and gathered intelligence that might save other human lives. For the first time in his career as a military analyst, Zixthara began to suspect that his side might not win this war. And somewhere deep in the mountains, 12,000 humans were preparing for whatever came next. The biological weapon fell from orbit like a gentle rain. Zixthara watched through his sensors as the invisible death spread across the mountains, seeking out human DNA and destroying it cell by cell. Within 48 hours, the resistance was over. The mountains became silent. For the first time in weeks, Zixthara felt something like relief. The nightmare was finally ending. 12,000 humans had died, along with most of the plant and animal life on the planet. But the hegemony forces would survive. Their biological filters protected them from the weapon that had been designed to kill only organic life forms. General Vorth's voice echoed across the command frequencies with satisfaction. Excellent. Begin standard occupation procedures. This world is now officially part of the hegemony. Zixthara began preparing his final report. The conquest of Harvest 7 had been messy and expensive, but it was complete. He would recommend new protocols for dealing with species that showed unusual resistance patterns. Future conquests would be more efficient. Then his long-range sensors detected something impossible. 3 massive signatures were approaching from the edge of the star system. Ships. Big ones. Moving faster than anything in the hegemony fleet. General, Zixthara called out, his voice tight with confusion. I am detecting approaching vessels. Configuration unknown. They are not using any propulsion system in our databases. General Vorth's reply was annoyed. Impossible. There are no human military forces in this sector. Your sensors are malfunctioning. But Zixthara's sensors were working perfectly. As the ships came closer, his instruments began gathering more detailed information. What they revealed made no sense at all. The approaching vessels were clearly of human construction, but they were enormous. Each ship was larger than a hegemony battlecruiser. Their hulls were made of materials that his sensors could not identify. They moved through space without visible engines, using some kind of technology that bent space itself around them. This was not the primitive human technology they had encountered on the colony world. This was something far more advanced. General, Zixthara reported, his voice now shaking. The approaching ships appear to be human military vessels. They are using technology that exceeds our current understanding. You are mistaken, General Vorth snapped. Humans are primitive. They cannot have ships like that. The 3 human ships took up positions around the hegemony fleet with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. Then they stopped, hanging in space like predators studying their prey. A communication signal reached the hegemony fleet. The voice that spoke was calm, professional, and completely without emotion. "This is Admiral Sarah Martinez, of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You have used biological weapons against civilian populations. This is a violation of interstellar law and basic decency. There are no rules anymore." General Vorth activated his own communication system. "Unknown vessels, you are trespassing in hegemony space. Withdraw immediately or face destruction." The response came instantly. "You killed our people with poison gas. Our response will be proportional." What happened next would be burned into Zix Thara's memory forever. The human ships did not fire missiles or energy beams. Instead, they simply appeared next to hegemony vessels, moving faster than physics should allow. Boarding pods launched from the human ships and cut through hegemony hulls like they were made of paper. Then came the screaming over the communication channels. Zix Thara listened in horror as hegemony soldiers reported being boarded by human troops who moved and fought like nothing they had ever encountered. These were not the desperate colonists who had defended Haven City. These were professional human military forces, and they were absolutely terrifying. The boarding actions were not chaotic battles. They were systematic exterminations. The human soldiers moved through hegemony ships with mechanical precision, eliminating resistance and capturing key positions. They used weapons that seemed to ignore energy shields and armor. They fought like machines built for one purpose: killing. Within 2 hours, the entire hegemony fleet was either destroyed or captured. 200,000 soldiers. Gone. The pride of the Valderan military. Eliminated by 3 human ships. But Zix Thara's observation vessel was not attacked. Instead, a human boarding pod approached and attached to his ship. He waited for death, but instead, a single human soldier entered his control room. The human was tall and moved with fluid precision. His face showed no emotion, no anger, no hatred. He looked at Zix Thara with the same expression a scientist might use when studying an interesting specimen. "You are the intelligence analyst," the human said. It was not a question. Zix Thara nodded, too frightened to speak. "Your ship will not be destroyed. You will return to your people and tell them what you witnessed here. Make sure they understand what happened." "I do not understand," Zix Thara managed to whisper. "The humans on the planet were primitive. How do you have technology that surpasses ours?" The human soldier tilted his head slightly. "The colonists were farmers and teachers, not soldiers. This is what human soldiers look like. But their technology was appropriate for a farming colony. This is appropriate for war." The human turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. The people you killed on the planet were sending us data the entire time they fought. Every tactic you used, every weapon you deployed, every weakness you revealed. They died gathering intelligence on your species. We learned everything we needed to know. Everything we needed to know." Zix Thara felt his world shift. They were spying on us? They were doing their duty. Every human who dies, fighting an enemy, sends information back to the rest of us. We learn from every battle, every defeat, every victory. Your people made the mistake of thinking that winning meant the fighting was over. The human soldier paused at the airlock door. "Tell your leaders that humanity is not interested in conquest. But if you attack our people again, we will respond. And next time, we will not just destroy your fleets. We will find your home worlds." Then he was gone, leaving Zix Thara alone with his terror and his understanding. The colonists had never been trying to win. They had been gathering intelligence, learning about hegemony capabilities, and transmitting everything to the human military. Every human who died had made the rest of their species more dangerous. As his ship was released to return home, Zixthara realized the truth that would haunt him forever. The hegemony had not been fighting a war. They had been participating in humanity's research program. And now, the real human military knew everything they needed to know about how to kill Valdorans. The High Council chamber was filled with the representatives of 7 species, all gathered around the great circular table that had been the center of hegemony power for over 1,000 years. Zixthara stood in the center of the room, holding his final report, while the most powerful beings in the galaxy waited to hear about the conquest of one small human world. Supreme Commander Galox spoke first, his massive form looming over the table. Analyst Zixthara, your preliminary reports have been disturbing. Explain these excessive casualty numbers from what should have been a simple operation. Zixthara looked around the chamber at faces that showed irritation and impatience, but no real concern. They still believed this had been an unusual, but minor setback. They had no idea what he had really witnessed. Honored counselors, Zixthara began carefully. The humans of Harvest 7 were not like other species we have encountered. They fought with strategies and determination that exceed all previous models. Counselor Vexara, representing the technical caste, interrupted with a dismissive gesture. Impossible. Our intelligence clearly showed primitive technology, chemical weapons and metal projectiles. How could such crude tools cause significant casualties to our forces? The humans did not rely on superior technology, Zixthara replied. They relied on superior adaptation. Every engagement taught them new information about our capabilities. Every defeat made them more effective in the next battle. The counselors exchanged glances. Supreme Commander Galox leaned forward. You are saying they learned from combat experience. This is normal for most species. No, Supreme Commander. This was something different. The humans did not just learn from their own experiences. They learned from each other's deaths. Every human who died fighting transmitted tactical data to the others. They turned casualties into intelligence-gathering operations. Counselor Mordak spoke up, his voice skeptical. Even if this is true, they were still defeated. Our biological weapons eliminated the resistance completely. Zixthara felt a chill run through his body. This was the part he dreaded most. The resistance was eliminated, yes. But 3 human military vessels arrived afterward. They destroyed our entire fleet. IT-9. Context. The rebel-sating. Relected. The relected. Weaken relected. And the primes. Weaken relected. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Supreme Commander Galox slammed his fist on the table. 3 ships defeated 200,000 soldiers? This is impossible. Butter. I witnessed it personally, Supreme Commander. The human military uses technology that surpasses our own. Their ships move faster than our sensors can track. Their weapons ignore our shields and armor. Their soldiers fight with precision that exceeds our best warriors. Then why, demanded Counselor Vexara, did the colonists use primitive weapons if humans possess advanced technology? Zixthara had been dreading this question. Because the colonists were not soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, and engineers. The humans sent civilians to establish the colony, but they were prepared to gather military intelligence if attacked. The chamber fell silent. Zixthara continued, his voice growing stronger as he explained what he had learned. The human colonists were never trying to win a military victory. They were conducting reconnaissance. Every tactic we used, every weapon we deployed, every strategic decision we made was recorded and transmitted to the human military. When we used biological weapons, we provided them with the justification they needed to respond with full force. Supreme Commander Galox stood slowly, his face showing the first signs of real concern. Are you telling this council that we were manipulated into revealing our military capabilities? Yes, Supreme Commander. The humans turned our conquest into their intelligence operation. They sacrificed 50,000 civilians to learn everything they needed to know about how to defeat us. Counselor Mordak spoke quietly. What is the current status of human military forces? Zix Thara pulled up his final analysis. Unknown. The 3 ships that destroyed our fleet represent technology we cannot match. But we do not know how many ships they possess, where their main bases are located, or what their full capabilities might be. They deliberately allowed me to escape to deliver this report. Recommendations? Asked Supreme Commander Galax. Zix Thara had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Complete avoidance of human space. Reclassify humanity as a major threat species. Cancel all expansion plans in their direction. The chamber erupted again. Counselor Vex Era's voice rose above the others. You want us to hide from a species we had never heard of 6 months ago? I want us to survive, Zix Thara replied firmly. The humans do not appear interested in conquest. But if we attack them again, I believe they will respond by finding our homeworlds and destroying our entire civilization. Supreme Commander Galax studied the data displays for several long minutes. Finally, he spoke. Your recommendations are noted, Analyst Zix Thara. However, this council believes you have been traumatized by your experiences, and your judgment is compromised. Zix Thara felt his hopes crumble. Supreme Commander, please reconsider. The humans are not like other species. They fight wars to learn how to fight better wars. Every conflict makes them more dangerous. Enough, commanded the Supreme Commander. This council has decided. We will assemble the Grand Armada. 1 million ships will be dispatched to human space. We will demonstrate the full power of the hegemony and end this threat permanently. Zix Thara made one final attempt. Supreme Commander, what if the humans have been preparing for exactly this response? What if they want us to send our entire fleet against them? A duinist. But the council had already moved on to planning the invasion. Logistics officers were called in to discuss supply lines. Fleet commanders began coordinating ship deployments. The greatest military force in galactic history was being organized to crush one species that had embarrassed them. That night, Zix Thara submitted his resignation from military service. He used his personal savings to purchase passage on a transport ship heading for the Outer Rim territories, as far from both human space and hegemony space as possible. 6 months later, he was living quietly on a small mining station when the news reached him. The Grand Armada had launched toward human space with great fanfare and celebration. 1 million ships carrying the finest warriors from 7 different species. None of them had returned. There had been no distress signals, no reports of battle, no wreckage found floating in space. 1 million ships had simply disappeared as if they had never existed. The hegemony was frantically assembling another fleet when reports began coming in from the outer colonies. Human ships had been seen near hegemony border worlds, not attacking, just watching, studying, learning. Zix Thara read these reports while sitting in a small cafe on the mining station, drinking synthetic tea and watching the stars through the viewport. He was not surprised by any of it. Somewhere out there, humanity was preparing for the next phase of whatever they were planning. They had just learned everything they needed to know about the combined military capabilities of 7 different species. 1 million warships worth of tactical data, weapon specifications, and strategic intelligence. And they had done it by letting their enemies come to them. Zix Thara finished his tea and walked back to his small apartment. Tomorrow, he would continue his new life as a maintenance worker on a forgotten mining station. It was honest work, far from the centers of power and military planning. He never wanted to analyze another species' military capabilities for the rest of his life. He had seen what happened when you underestimated humanity. They turned your own strength against you, and they made you grateful for the privilege.